Boom. And we're
All
back.
right. Welcome back. Each week we should promise to add something new to the show brand. Like we have the name of the show. That's a huge
Mm-hmm.
first step. But then we need a slogan. And then by the end of the
Right.
quarter, we're going to need you to sing the theme song for the show.
Okay, yes. Yeah, totally down. And then we need to start having maybe every episode we have a new segment. So like by the end of the year we have 20 segments and all it is segments.
Yeah. When is the tripwire for We've Gone Too Far? It's like, well, we need a second theme song for in-person recordings, obviously.
Hey, I don't think that's even enough. We can do more.
But yeah, welcome back. And I think really excited today to do something we've really wanted to do since the inception of the show, which is actually come back to something that we've mentioned before, but go really sort of deep on the subject. I think we've used this show as sort of a first contact with ideas that we're seeing brands kind of do or stuff we're thinking about. And this will probably be an episode style you'll see in the future too, of when we really hit on something that we just feel like a lot of our customers, a lot of our users, just marketers generally seem to be stuck on. We'll come back to it and we'll kind of do a full episode dedicated to it. And so this episode is all about the ominously named, although I think far less complicated and not so scary, dark social. So Jack, actually to start, was dark social kind of is that something you've heard about recently? Did you kind of come into this contact with this term even before, or has it picked up more so? I would love to get your take on just seeing it in your feed and seeing it out in the world.
Yeah, actually, no, I hadn't seen it until you sort of brought it to my attention. For those of you who don't know, Greg is somewhat new to Kapwing. So when he came on, I feel like that was something that you were talking about pretty frequently. And we all the whole team sort of picked up as an interesting aspect of social, the power of social, attribution, all of that. But prior to that, I feel like I didn't, I had thought about the topic before, of course, many times, but sort of without one or two word term to sort of encapsulate what it's all about. I think probably this is a concept that I would imagine most marketers deal with, where you're making a lot of content, but how do you even know if it's successful? Because a lot of times social, your TikTok videos aren't getting direct link clicks, things like that. And how do you really measure that success is something that I think probably most marketers think about, but I didn't have a term for that until I heard about this. So really excited to sort of talk about this and get people, give people the lingo that they need to know to describe maybe their pains, things like that.
For sure. I mean, I think, me delving into dark social, just to give folks some background, you might have heard them on previous episodes, but my former role was at Shopify, and they had really exceptional data in the growth team. But one thing that definitely was reinforced working with Shopify is really excellent growth marketers and data scientists was just because you have the data, that does not necessarily mean you have the insight. Sometimes data that's misinterpreted actually does more harm than good, because it misleads you into thinking you have something conclusive when you don't. And I only say that to say dark social is, I would say, kind of the catalyst for it, or what's really driving the discussion is it's actually a data conversation that really sort of kicked things off, I believe. And so what dark social actually is, what the term represents, is just the channels and platforms where your buyers are having touch points with your brand. So they're coming across content, they're just engaging with your brand in some way, or they're having a discussion about you or your product in places where you just can't track it in the way that you can track things on your website. So this is a big umbrella term that includes stuff that your company or your marketing team might actively be sort of doing, native social, podcast, things like this. It can also be things entirely out of your control, most community stuff. It's If
Right.
you can have an influence, like that's usually the furthest you can go with a community that's truly not like owned by a company. So it's really the range of those things. But why I think this like, I mean, those things have been around, right, for quite a while. They've definitely reached like a scale over time that's like far greater than they were in the past, like even the past 10 years. Those things that we just mentioned, right? Like the size of some podcasts, the size of social platforms nowadays, how big communities are getting online, stuff like that. They're all like at the max kind of scale that they've ever been. But dark social was sort of more driven by this like these other trends, I think, in the backdrop too, like for specifically marketing trends in the backdrop, which I would say the big three were probably a mix of like platforms not wanting to send as many clicks
Yeah.
offsite. That's been happening for a
Classic.
long time. Yeah, been
Yeah.
happening for a long time. But if you know, a lot of the best data that they have on that is from news sites, and if you track that, if you look at that, the line's still going down. So it definitely has not gotten better. It's probably gotten even worse, even from when that initial drop off happened. So that's number one. Platforms don't want to send clicks offsite. Number two, like analytics data just has like gotten muddier over time, like just across the board. You have sort of like privacy stuff, like at Shopify, obviously a big talking point was some of the iOS privacy stuff that came out was especially tough on like small e-com sites. They couldn't really sort of get the data that they used to be able to get. But you also just have like popular ad blockers. I mean, I think people, you know, who use them or who are in marketing may be familiar with like how big ad blockers are. But until you've seen that data, you don't really realize sometimes just how many people have like an ad blocker installed as like the first thing they do when they re-download Chrome, Firefox, etc. So you have that. You have sort of just like it's harder sometimes to get accurate data or get the data that you used to get. But then I think the third thing was actually just like digital marketers were we were picking up like so much experience that they just started to ask more pointed questions, more contrarian questions about like where's the revenue really coming from? Like I've picked up enough sort of know-how here, and I've seen things sort of go maybe the other way than what my data is telling me, that now I'm starting to question my dashboard in full, or I'm starting to question my dashboard in like fundamentally new ways. And so that I think is where like the value of dark social and the conversation around dark social has come from, because you have kind of all these things convening of like, well, harder to do the digital marketing we all once knew, harder to measure it. You have these other platforms growing, swelling in size in terms of people's like the time they spend there, and also just the number of people there, the number of people you can reach there. And those two things colliding have kind of prompted this conversation of like, well, do those dark social channels actually contribute more to your business or more to your marketing than previously believed? So I would say roughly, did not intend to give sort of like a campsite of like a fireside like story of like dark social from the beginning, but that I would say is probably what gets us to the conversation today. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely. Yeah, I think definitely all those ring true to me. I feel like definitely getting people off of platforms, I feel like, is getting harder and harder.
Marketers we actually have things to be nostalgic about now. Like, remember when Facebook actually used to send you traffic?
Right. I know, seriously. But yeah, but I still feel like we're getting at, and obviously that's the whole point of the episode, but yeah, like even if it's harder to get people off in direct clicks, I feel like people are still obviously highly influenced by content they see on these platforms. Now they just go about reaching the site for the first time, or your product or whatever, in different ways, rather than just clicking the first link in the bio, like you can do on YouTube. It's maybe a Google search, or maybe it's something
typing
like
in
that.
the domain. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like typing in the
exactly.
domain directly that they saw. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think like I got to give a shout out early on in this episode of like, there's a small, I think, set of like really great champions for dark social as like a concept. I've especially enjoyed like the way that this company Refine Labs, the marketing agency, has sort of approached tackling this topic or trying to like shine light on this topic. I think we mentioned them in a previous episode, but again, really, really great sort of data coming out from them. As an agency, one of the superpowers they have is they get to see sort of like a variety of funnels from a variety of companies. This is data that they released previously, sort of looking at what we were talking about, like attribution that you can track in your sort of traditional analytics platform versus the way dark social, at least the way that they've sort of proposed or again championed the way dark social be measured, is you actually just have to ask customers about it.
Mm-hmm.
So where did you first hear from us is a very common one. You probably see that a lot more in products, given how many marketers have been kind of like discussing this. You will find it in Kapwing when you sign up, for example. Like you'll see that question asked as part of your onboarding. And so this data that they initially shared was kind of a look at, I believe it was a set of clients, maybe sort of kind of collected together, but it was basically comparing like what this software was sort of attributing to, like where the software said that the pipeline was coming from, and then where customers were actually saying self-attribution, where they said where we first heard of this product or this company. And so the dark social chart really captured, I think, or the dark social premise really captured in those middle three. The data overall, though, spells a picture of like very easily measurable channels like search tends to get overrepresented or can get overrepresented in software, whereas the channels that are sort of like offsite, or they involve a variety of touch points, or they're more content focused, or like you said, they're more so marketing that would get someone to like seek you out later. Like, mm-hmm. Oh, I watched 3 of your guys' podcast episodes, or I've been following this writer for some time. And then when I finally had the problem, boom, I remembered this product that they write about, or that the company that they work for. And then I actually go seek them out in my own way, which might be like a branded search, or just like literally typing in the .com or something. Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, no surprise, I suppose, if this is the case that you would want to make, that like social media and podcast and word of mouth tends to, maybe show up, more so when you measure it this way. So this is great data, even if it just gets the conversation going, right? Like I take sort of all third-party data with a grain of salt, mostly just because like you don't want to rely too much on things that aren't your own funnel, that your own customers aren't telling you. But this was a great like shaking of the tree moment that I think got a lot of people to question, like, wait a minute, like where are our customers actually coming from? Like, have we actually fact checked the what our analytics platform is telling us with what customers say,
Yeah. I mean, the discrepancies here are huge. It's kind of insane to, contribute like 80% or attribute 80% of customer acquisition in software versus less than 3% is crazy. I have to imagine like it's the real truth is somewhere in the middle, probably.
Perhaps muddier. Perhaps,
yeah. But still, I mean, that's a huge difference. And yeah, I mean, it's just kind of crazy. It's almost laughable, right? Like how potentially wrong this software can be. 0% podcast and then up to like 53% is like pretty crazy.
Yeah. I feel like the branded content teams everywhere are just content teams that were relying on stuff out of just search have all dropped this chart in their Slack at some point or another, or they will after maybe this, a little bit more exposure from this episode as well. But yeah, I think like 2 things to call out is one, like Refined team, obviously very sharp folks. They have sort of come back and corrected people on like, hey, the purpose of this was never really to say like, don't trust your software. The purpose of this was to say like, you probably need like a hybrid approach. You need a mixed approach to measuring attribution, and like, let's just not rely too heavily on the software. I also think it's worth mentioning up front, like, and we'll get into more sort of like the ins and outs of dark social itself, but covering off this like analytics portion of it. There's definitely been criticisms to like just that question, like, where did you first hear of us? I think like the best criticism, so to speak, or the most poignant criticism is just like what I think every marketer knows about surveys, which is like, you have to take surveys with a little bit of a grain of salt. Like some people there are ways to try to counteract this, but some people might just literally pick the wrong thing because they just don't care. Like it's
Yeah.
like, I'm just trying to get in, click, get me out of here. There are a lot of other like more earnest mistakes they can make though. So like literally just forgetting, like just forget, like I think the irony actually is like prospects that have kind of engaged with you a lot, like they've seen a lot of your content or they've seen a lot of your brand. It might actually be harder for them to remember where they
Yeah.
first heard of you, right?
True.
Because they have way more to remember versus somebody that's kind of just like coming in off of one thing. And then the last one, I don't want to repeat jokes because I believe I did this for our last set, but the old sort of data science joke that the team at Shopify used to say of like, you look back at what leads to a successful proposal, a marriage. You don't want to over attribute the first date, the restaurant you went to for the first date, and you don't want to over attribute the place that you propose, right? So the Italian restaurant shouldn't get 100% credit, and then the beach that you propose on shouldn't get 100% credit either. So any kind of like attribution that relies on like one point in time is always going to have a little bit of like, you got to watch out. It's not the full story, right? But it's a good counteract. It's a good way to counteract the fact that we know software tends to mostly give like outsized credit to like kind of that last part of the relay race, right? The stuff on the website. So this, I think it's more of a way to just like counterbalance that rather than like try to replace it or anything like that.
Yeah. No, completely. I think it does just paint the picture of what we're talking about, though, which is like social. It's important, number one, and also it's a long game. A lot of times, it's not something that you necessarily. I mean, sometimes it can happen this way, but it's not something you like an ad where you see it one time, you click on it, and it takes you to the website, and you sign up. It's more of like a long game where you're potentially either showing off your product and impacting people that way, but also you have personalities connected to your company that people can that are making content people can consume and actually enjoy and lead them back that way when they have a need for your product. It's definitely like this middle chunk, and I think a lot of people I think a lot of people who like aren't in marketing misunderstand that, like they think socials kind of like can be a waste of energy or money or time. But I think, now we have with some data like this, and now that, even at Kapwing, we're doing our own data. People are starting to see that it's actually like much more impactful and less trackable. And that's a really important thing to know when you're like advocating for where your budget is going, and what sorts of projects you need to be doing to market your product. And it's not always an easy thing to do, I think, in marketing, especially when you're going for some of these like video forward projects that aren't like ads.
Definitely. And it's like, if you are a marketer who can, and this is hard to do, like, but if you're someone who works in marketing who can keep some sort of honest tabs on like how you actually buy products too, like for the couple of weeks I was able to maintain that because again, it's like you just like anyone else go into kind of autopilot mode. You forget where you first heard of stuff. But I always did have sort of like a feeling that like I was showing up in marketers' databases and just like totally throwing off like their attribution, because like I would actually discover a product by like, following some person doing tutorials via like LinkedIn videos or something. And then I would though like Google something related to the product to like actually get me there. And so they're behind the scenes like, yep, got another awesome customer from Google search. And in reality, like what actually first of all, like the first touch point, not only the first touch point, but what actually compelled me to go and try and buy was the stuff that was happening like completely elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
So there's also just the like common sense personal experience kind of thing of just if you keep tabs on like, well, how have you kind of what started like your most big recent purchase or biggest purchase for like your company or for your team. And it's often a lot more complicated than you may even imagine for your own funnels, right? You have to recognize the messiness of it all. And I think speaking of like speaking of like what I shared there, like I think a lot of folks end up getting me through like really in-depth kind of like video tutorials. It's just like the role of like, is the role of video instead of like native video content and how that influences dark social. Um, it really is sort of like they go together perfectly. Like it really, I'm really actually excited to see people kind of questioning or kind of like at least being more open-minded to the impact of all this like native social content. Because again, I think our common sense tells us like, wow, lots of messages reach and influence me through these platforms, right?
Yeah.
So if it's not showing up in our attribution today, something is probably off with the attribution rather than something being wrong with or me like sort of like misreading the impact of like video and social content, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, I think like, I mean, the first one to kind of start with, I think, is just sort of like, um, yes, like platforms, they want to keep you on site, they don't want to link you out, but the type of content, the format that they seem to be rewarding more and more, with some exceptions. I think that there are some exceptions to this, but pretty universally, video is like sitting at the top of the list.
Yeah,
Like,
completely.
I actually think like I was surprised to see like LinkedIn might be more sort of spread out, or maybe even still kind of favors text and visuals for the moment. But like everywhere else is like video just sits at the top of the mountain, really, like without question.
Yeah.
And that has huge implications if you believe in, if you know, you're willing to sort of explore dark social, willing to open up the way that you measure and attribute your marketing projects and initiatives. Like that makes video really, really exciting. Where it already was exciting, but now we're sort of playing in this whole new game where perhaps we can measure it and give it the credit that it really deserves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think at this point it's almost like, social media managers, that kind of used to be the title. And then, there's still, of course, going to be social media managers, but I feel like pretty much if you are a social media manager, you're also kind of a video creator at this point, or like need to have some of those skills. At least if you're creating content at all. So yeah, to your point, Greg, I think obviously we all feel this way. We can all feel it. We can see it based on like just infrastructure changes based on social, but also there is a reason for this. It's also just because people love sharing video. I think most people, when they're sharing a piece of content, they are most likely to share video over anything else, over a static post on social, over blog posts, written posts, and anything else. And it's not just, a little bit more. It's very significant. Over half of people, when asked of what they share first, are sharing video. That's, according to this data by Wise Owl. It's pretty much twice as popular as the next big thing, which is still social media. And so clearly, to our point too, video and social media are very important. And I think it, makes a lot of sense. It's kind of a chicken or the egg thing, I wonder. It's like, obviously a lot of these platforms are pushing video, so it's no surprise that like people are watching more video and sharing more video to me. But also I think it's video is more informational often, it's more entertaining often, and yeah, it's easier to consume often in less time. You can get a good amount of information in less time, I think, than reading personally. And so I think that's why video is so popular. I don't think it'll ever go away. I don't think we'll probably ever see it go back to, blogs being king. No offense.
They had a good run.
Yeah, had a good run, but people are not reading and writing anymore. So it's time to move on.
Bold claim.
They're not teaching reading in school anymore. It's how to make a TikTok, okay? But yeah, so I think this is just more evidence that video is everything, and more companies probably need to be emphasizing making more video content, or social content at least, and putting that into consideration when they're making their budgets and making their roadmaps and things like that.
Yeah.
Like social is important.
Yeah. And like obviously a lot of the stuff we talk about on this show, there's like a connective thread here, right? Like a lot of these topics end up relating to each other because it's all happening, sort of at the same time, of course. And I think one that's like a good callback for this is like, yeah, like the short form that you go out with or the long form that you repurpose, like you just have so many more places to take video. And so I think there's been sort of a reversal, so to speak, to your point about blogs, where the blog sort of used to be like the place where you start the process. Like we've been using kind of like first contact as the term, meaning just like this is where the content goes out and reaches people first. It's the first place that you share an idea. And blogs definitely sort of had, they were the default medium. And now it sort of seems like, well, actually, we should test out a few ideas, maybe on social first, or if we have a lot of conviction, we're going to do a long form podcast or webinar or something first, and then get a ton of mileage out of that via clipping and going through social. And then, when we've maybe firmed it all up, we can sort of come back and do like the authoritative, the encapsulation, the distillation blog post that kind of summarizes it all or something, right? This is like we're still kind of like figuring out the exact details, but I think our first looks at like a really serious like system for content atomization and repurposing kind of looks at it that way too. Like there's just so many more places we can take our ideas with video, so why not do that first? And then when we want something that's like a great easy reference point, easy to skim and scan, and for some people who just like really would love to just power through it in a 3-minute reading session, we'll finally do the text
For
the
those
text
of you
product.
who can read.
Yeah, so pretty sure literacy
Not
rates
me.
are still on the up and up, hopefully. But yeah, no, so like there's just so many more places to take it to. And then like you said, there's this other thing happening that's like marketers have to more, you're responding to this, you're riding this wave, which is the platforms themselves. Like they like video for their own reasons, whether it keeps people on site better, whether it's better for advertising. Like you sort of just have to follow their lead on that. But right now, kind of like all signs pointing to, video first. And I think the last, let's not say the last piece of the puzzle, but a very important piece of the puzzle for all of this native content was attribution. And now that this is getting questioned and being sort of like brought to light, if you can prove this out, you can find ways to sort of come back and say, hey, look, we're well beyond past like likes and engagements and all this surface level stuff you might have heard from social teams in the past. Like we can actually, with thought leadership campaigns, with deep dive videos like podcasts and stuff like this, we can actually attribute like PQL's revenue, like really, really a critical like business metrics too,
Yeah, no, I think it's important to have this evidence. And if you can do this like at your own company, that's obviously even better. Because I mean, I feel like I bring this up. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but like, even at Kapwing, back in the day, a couple of years ago when I started, like we were kind of playing with TikTok and we were doing pretty well. Got like, I think over 1 million views in the first like month of trying it. And we got like 3 link clicks. And so we were like, oh, this is not a worthy investment. And now like looking back, it's like, well, we actually don't know that. We didn't have this attribution data for ourselves at the time on our website. We weren't asking people where they came from. And so, it kind of feels like, oh, if we had only just asked, then we would have had a way better understanding of the power of these platforms.
And I don't mean to look, I'm not trying to gas any of the listeners up here, but I actually do mean this with full sincerity, which is like the stuff that you pay attention to on shows like this or in your social feed with marketers, like it can be surprising actually how ahead of like just the full like landscape some of these conversations are. Because to your point, Jack, like, I mean, I still see brand accounts just literally just posting links to blog posts. Like it's just a drip feed of blog posts and nobody engages with it. It does nothing. I can't actually believe that there's a paid employee who has to go into some scheduling tool and just like drip feed these out? Like, what are they like? Even if they're only spending like 5 minutes a day on it, they should be spending 0 minutes a day on it. So that's not to like poke fun or anything. It's just to highlight like people are still running marketing playbooks that are like 10 years out of date. So let
Yeah, of
alone
course.
sort of like figuring out like the most modern way to do something or the most modern thinking on it. Like there's companies that are more than a decade behind in some cases. So just
Yeah.
by like, no one listening to this should feel like, oh, if you haven't cracked the code for dark social, or if you've made mistakes like we've made with attribution, that like you've got it all wrong or something. I think just even opening up to this idea of like, hey, how can we, if we were to invest big into native social content, to video content, would we have the telemetry in place to measure it? And as we started measuring that, would we be able to paint a picture for more investment? And just like, if that lines up with your current convictions, if you're a marketer that's kind of like, well, I believe in this, but right now they've got me doing only the like super attributable stuff. Like, I think it's time to start considering how can I slowly build that case and maybe get a couple early wins, to just sort of make your point. But yeah, it's, we're all sort of doing internal championing, and we're all sort of working with these trends happening in the backdrop. So nobody should feel like listening to this that they should have it figured out by now or something, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing, it's like a saying that people say about, like, I think in like dating or like with their friends or something, but I think it actually applies to this too, is like, when people show you who they really are, believe them. It's like when social media channels show you what they want you to use them. Like, use the short form. Like when YouTube shorts were announced, you should be using short form. When Instagram started pushing reels, you should be using reels. TikTok started pushing, it went from, I think initially it was 15 seconds and it extended to 60, and now it's even like 10 minutes. Like, be experimenting with that. Like, video is like clearly important also because, you just have to trust that these companies are going to reward you for using what they want you to use. So get into it, try it out.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of inputs as a marketer now. You've got what your customers tell you, you've got what the algorithms reward, and you've got what your attribution software tells you. Like, you basically want to triangulate what's actually working from multiple inputs like that, just like you said. So it's like, don't over rely on one. Kind of keep all of them in mind, I think, and use all of them to sort of try to get to the truth. If there was truly a one-liner takeaway for this episode, it might just be like, the truth is hard to get to in marketing. Like, it takes some work, and I think dark social is just one more thing that is challenging marketers to try to do a better job of actually getting to the truth.
Yep. Yeah, that's deep. So we'll leave you with that. We'll leave you to panic with that.
That's our tagline. Show tagline, check.
Totally, we got there. Sweet. Well, I think that about covers everything on dark social that we have for you today. Thank you guys for watching, keeping up. Let us know if there's anything you want us to talk about in the future. By the way, we're all ears. And Greg, it's been a pleasure as always.
Yeah, you can tell how passionate I am about any given topic by how sweaty my forehead is. So this one really came from the heart.
I don't know what you're talking about.
And the audio only listeners don't know either. Thank goodness.
Yes, good. All right. Well, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next week. See you later.